It is Wednesday, April 9th, 2014 at 9:05 a.m. and this meeting of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority Board is now in session. Mr. Tejas, are there any public comments? So, as you can see, we have a number of new board members today. It's my pleasure to introduce our new board members. We've got Dory Fennenbach, Les Parker, and Joe Wardy. On behalf of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Board, welcome. Look forward to your contribution in our efforts to continuing to move mobility forward in this community and look forward to your contributions. Would you all like to make any comments, anything along those lines? No? Super. We also have some recognition of some former board members. We are waiting on one former board member, and so we are going to push that agenda item number 3 or number 4 back a little bit while we've done that. Prior to us looking at and adopting the minutes for the CRRMA board meeting of February 12th, there's a discussion and action item for item number 5 on the election of the CRRMA officers. In your backup, you saw the descriptions for the various capacities: vice chair, treasurer, secretary, and alternate secretary. You also saw in the backup that we're required every February to elect officers, and so we just went through this exercise as per the bylaw requirements back in February. But with the recent changes and additions to the board, we need to go through that process again. So we have 4 positions up for nomination and confirmation today: vice chair, treasurer, secretary, and alternate secretary. As I stated, all the backup was in your was provided in the backup. Is there any nominations from the board for vice chair, treasurer, secretary, or alternate secretary?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a nomination. Individual to my left has a number of years of experience in private sector, the public sector, and it's well known in the transportation area. Joe Wardy. I would nominate him as vice chair. Second.
At second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Joe Wardy is our new vice chair. Thank you, Mr. Wardy. Welcome to the team.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Treasurer, as I described, the description's also in the backup. Are there any nominations for treasurer? Any volunteers for the treasurer position before I volunteer someone?
Well, I'd like to make a nomination. We have one current banker and one ex-banker. So, Mr. Parker, your baptism of fire, I would nominate you to be the treasurer for this board.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Secretary and alternate secretary. Ms. Melendez is currently the secretary, as elected per the last election, still on the board. I believe probably best to look at nominating either Ms. Melendez again or another secretary, and then setting up an alternate secretary. Any nominations for secretary? I think Ms. Melendez would. I think I'm comfortable in speaking on her behalf. So we have a nomination for Ms. Melendez. Is that correct? Is there a second?
Yes, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
So we'll notify Ms. Melendez that she's secretary, and the last position fills in when the secretary is not available as alternate secretary. Any volunteers? Ms. Fennenbach?
I would nominate Ms. Fennenbach then.
Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we have a new slate of officers. We've got Joe Wardy as vice chair. We've got Les Parker as treasurer. We've got Susan Melendez carrying on in her current capacity as secretary. And we've got Ms. Fennenbach as alternate secretary. So recorded. Item 6, adoption of the minutes from the CRRMA board meeting of February 12th, 2014. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes? Is there any questions, additions, or deletions to the minutes as they were presented? If not, is there a motion to accept the minutes from February 12th, 2014?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The minutes of February 12th, 2014 are accepted into the record and adopted. Mr. Tejas, is Mr. Adama here yet?
Not yet.
Okay, I'll keep my eye out for him. We'll move on to item 7, discussion and action on a board resolution selecting an updated underwriting pool for the CRRMA pursuant to the CRRMA's request for qualifications issued January 30th, 2014. It's kind of a nice process. The last time we did this was back in 2009 when we issued our first bond issuance. Mr. Tejas, you want to give us the background?
Yes, sir. Raymond Tejas, Executive Director of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority. So as the chair mentioned, this was last done in 2009. As you'll note, with later items on this agenda, we're anticipating a bond issuance before too long, and certainly within this year. So we felt that it was time to update our existing underwriter pool. So today we have with us Mr. Troy Madras, who's part of the First Southwest Company, who serves as our financial advisor. I'm going to ask him to join us at the podium to provide the presentation in terms of the procurement, how it was developed, how it went, and recommended underwriting pool for us today. Mr. Madras.
Great. Good morning. My name is Troy Madras. I am with First Southwest Company. In our capacity, we serve as financial advisor to the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority. We're going to go take a look at how this underwriting pool process worked, starting on slide 1.
Hold on a second, Mr. Madras.
Sure.
There should be a screen stream. It says on the left, and you should be able to pull up the PowerPoint on your screen. Is everyone able to access the PowerPoint?
No.
Right. Remy, can you get the IT folks out here again?
Okay. Okay. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All set?
Mr. Madras, I think we're ready. Thank you.
Okay, great. On the first slide, the selection of underwriter, subsequent to the pass-through deal that the Camino Real RMA did in 2008, the RMA last decided to go through an underwriting pool selection in 2009. So in July 2009, they selected 3 national firms, 3 regional firms, and 3 minority women-owned businesses to serve on the underwriting pool. And the way that that pool worked was that this group of 9 broker-dealer banks would be selected whenever the RMA would undertake a publicly sold bond deal. And so since that time, the RMA has actually not issued any publicly sold bonds. Working with TxDOT, they went through a number of state infrastructure bank loans, and that served to provide a lower cost of borrowing than going into the public market. Since we've had about a little less than 5 years since the last underwriting pool selection, and because the RMA is considering a vehicle registration bond deal, the RMA circulated a request for proposal to update its underwriting pool. We distributed it on January 29th. Questions were due on February 5th, and the response was due on February 19th. Oops. Moving on to slide 2. We list the number of respondents. We had 17 broker-dealers listed, and as you can see here, they're listed by the type of firm and in alphabetical order. We don't need to go through all the names. You can see who are the recipients, who are the respondents. On the next slide, we'll discuss the selection committee. It consisted of the following people. We had a nice mix of representatives from the city, from the county, our bond counsel, and then from the financial advisor. So Bill Studer from the city of El Paso, Wally Hargrove from El Paso County, Paul Braden, who's our bond counsel from Norton Rose Fulbright, Wayne Placide, my colleague at First Southwest, and myself. We met in late February to make recommendations for the underwriting pool. Do you want to? Okay. So if we move on to slide 4, the underwriting RFP selection committee recommendations for the 9 firms to be selected on the national side, led by, well, this is just in alphabetical order, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Citigroup, JP Morgan, On the regional side, Raymond James, Southwest Securities, Stifel Nicholas, and for minority women business, we've got Cabrera, Estrada Hinojosa, and Ramirez and Company. And actually,
Right, if I could interject
Yeah.
here. There is one point that I wanted to make here with regard to the regional firms, Southwest Securities, and I'll ask Mr. Madras to provide additional detail. However, at the time of the selection process, Southwest Securities was at that point in negotiations to be purchased, correct? And one of the firms that was looking at purchasing Southwest Securities included Hilltop.
Holdings, which is our parent firm. Yeah.
Correct. So because of that, and we had, as noted, the committee included Paul Braden, our outside bond counsel. At the time, he made sure that the First Southwest representatives did not discuss nor vote on the evaluation of Southwest Securities. So that was what was done at that time. Since then, I believe the negotiations have moved a little bit further, so it's ongoing. However, since I guess the purchase has not occurred, there is no existing conflict of interest at this point, as we are advised by Mr. Braden. So at this point, I am recommending also the recommended underwriter pool that you see before you, noting, however, that if that purchase actually occurs, where Hilltop Holdings actually purchases Southwest Securities, and if First Southwest continues as a financial advisor to the RMA, future bond issuances could not include Southwest Securities, so we would effectively remove them from the underwriting pool. So I wanted to make sure that everybody was this full, in an effort of full disclosure, I wanted you all to know about that. Great. Subject to your questions, I'll
Yeah.
ask Mr. Madras to continue.
That's about it. These are the recommendation from the committee. I'd like to turn it back to the board and see if you guys have any questions in regards to the process or the people that we selected.
Very similar to last time, 9 firms, kind of same breakup between national, regional, and minority women-owned businesses. Is that
Mhm.
correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And later on, you're going to present who you recommend work on the $72 million bond issuance for the county. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
So, is there any questions in regards to how the RFP went out, the 17 firms, how they were called to 9, and is there any questions or specifically about the conflict that was presented? Potential conflict. It's not a conflict, I would assume, until the sale is completed. At that point, it would be a conflict, and we would need to deal with it at that time. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Is there a motion to accept the selection committee recommendations for the 9 firms as presented?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The RMA board has approved the selection committee recommendations for the 9 firms.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Madras. At this point, I will switch back up to item 4 before we complete. Or Mr. Tejas, did you have any comments?
No, sir, go ahead.
So I wanted to switch back up to item 4. You know, we're very pleased to have a number of new board members, but we're also very grateful for the work that the previous board members have done on behalf of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority. We've got Ralph Adame, Rosario Holguin, and David Marcus, who are in attendance today. And I had a few nice comments to discuss, and as soon as I find those, I will, I'll be off and running. So, Ralph and David were founding board members for the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority Board and worked to do all the initial setup as well as establish the organizational bylaws. Their early work led to the first successful bond issuance for the RMA, the $233 million to assist in the funding for Spur 601, which was the first bond issuance in Texas to utilize pass-through toll funding and subsequently receive Bond Buyer Deal of the Year. Ms. Holguin has been an active and engaged participant in the board, always ready to assist with the RMA's mission. She brought a lot of passion and energy to the board, and I'm especially thankful for all of her help in regards to both the Spanish and English outreach as we went through and presented the Cesar Chavez managed lanes, and her assistance to get the word out and help the community understand what we were doing and how best to utilize those lanes. Collectively, Ralph, David, and Rosario have seen the RMA work in a number of roles. As I mentioned, in a finance role with the initial bond issuance for Spur 601. In design, we were asked by TxDOT to assist the design of Spur 1966, which is currently in construction today. As a developer, as we went through all the phases to complete and hand back to TxDOT the first 3 direct connectors of the $140 million Americas interchange, which was the first project in Texas to utilize TRZ as a funding source. As an operator with the Cesar Chavez managed lanes, and lastly for their work on the $406 million county mobility plan, as well as the $700 million Border Highway West project that's currently in process today. The CRRMA has made great strides in 7 years, involved in assisting in some facets over $1.5 billion worth of projects. And it would not have been possible or successful without the dedicated leadership of Ralph, David, and Rosario. On behalf of the board, know that the CRRMA is grateful for your efforts and thanks you for your leadership. We've gone out and created some plaques for each and every one of you, basically an appreciation for your dedicated service to the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority Board, April 9th, 2014. So I'd like this time to present you with your plaques. If you could come up, and on behalf of the board, we thank you for your efforts over the last years. David, thank you so much. Don, Ralph. Let's see. Mr. Tejas, are we ready to proceed? Was there anything we needed further discussion on that previous item, Mr. Tejas?
No, sir. No, sir. I think we're ready for item 8A. I would mention, though, that it appears that Mr. Braden is on a delayed flight, and he's supposed to be here to present item 8B. If he's not here, I think that I can cover it sufficiently for you. Although, actually, maybe if we could push to item 9 and have the Chavez Express toll lanes item in front of the comprehensive mobility plan, that may actually buy us some time for Mr. Braden.
Excellent. Then we will do as requested. We are going to temporarily skip over item 8, move to item 9. Presentation, discussion, and action on the initial performance report for the Cesar Chavez Express toll lanes. I believe we have Mr. Clayton Howell here today to give us the overview. Mr. Howell, welcome.
Good morning, and thank you for having us today. My name is Clayton Howe. For the record, I'm with Atkins Global, acting as your general engineering consultant. Today I'll be talking a little bit about the performance of the managed lanes as they've moved forward.
Mr. Howell, for the record, could you just, we have some new board member here, can you talk about kind of your previous experience with toll lanes and kind of your overall, kind of how you've worked on toll lanes, what your capacity has been, so they have a little bit of understanding of your expertise in this particular area?
Okay, absolutely. In my past life, I worked for the North Texas Tollway Authority that grew from an agency of about 150,000 transactions a day to about 2 million transactions a day. My responsibilities included all the operations, including the IT, the customer service, toll collections, incident management, roadway maintenance, and most of the other operational areas. I've been working as a part of your GEC team for about a year now and have been involved in the implementation of the managed lanes, the Cesar Chavez managed lanes.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Howell.
The first slide that we have is the total transactions, and I think it's a very positive trend that we're seeing, although, yes, sir?
I'd like to get my screen up, please. I got it.
Okay. Okay. As you can see, we started much slower out of January than was projected. I guess let me just take a step back. On this slide, we'll talk about the actual transactions, which is the number of transactions that happen in the lane that are captured. The forecasted transactions represent the traffic and revenue studies that were done prior to the opening of the road that anticipates how much traffic will use the roads during those periods.
And just to clarify, when you're talking about total transactions, you're talking about both pay by mail for those folks that don't have a transponder and transponder transactions. So that is the entire universe of transactions, correct?
Everything that happens on the roadway, yes, sir.
So we've got really two types of people that will use the Cesar Chavez. We've worked early on to let people know the benefit of using a toll tag in regards to easier billing, reduced fee. It's double the rate when it's a pay-by-mail. In addition, there's a pay-by-mail processing fee. Or we've got the folks that, for whatever reason, just on occasional use, don't have a toll tag, and they get mail, they bill in the mail. So you've got those combined transactions, and that's what we're looking at here today. Is that correct, Mr. House?
Yes, sir. In fact, in some of the subsequent slides, we'll break down between the pay-by-mail and the AVI, which is the toll tag transactions. In fact, I'll move on to the AVI. Now, AVI is automatic vehicle identification, and on this project, we use a transponder, and it captures all of the transaction information and is sent into the back office. We currently use the North Texas Tollway Authority to clear most of the transactions, but we also allow for any of the tags in the state of Texas to be used here in this region as well.
We only had a couple of options for AVI or toll tags. The toll tag from the North Texas Tollway Authority was one. In addition, TxDOT has their own tag called TxTag. That was an option as well. Hectra, which has a tag, was not an available option, so there was really only two. And we had a choice between the TxTag or the NTTA tag, the toll tag, which is that circle with the T, which is their brand logo, and the board chose that particular tag. So when we're talking about toll tags, those are the ones, and we had two choices available.
That's correct. And in addition to that, if someone from Houston had found themselves in El Paso, their Easy Tag would work on your system through the interoperability agreement through the state of Texas that you are a part of. On this graph, it represents these transponder transactions, and the initial first quarter average that was anticipated was about a 30% penetration rate, which means 30% of the transactions would be using a transponder to complete their transaction. We are running about 23%, so we're a little below what's anticipated in the TNR, but I would tell you that what I've seen at other agencies, especially startups in new areas that do not currently have tolling, this isn't unusual. Many times the benefit of a tag isn't realized until you receive your first notice and you pay the higher price.
Well, not to steal your thunder, but you'll also see in the later slides that the actual pay-by-mail is actually running ahead of forecast. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's
so,
correct.
you know, and then we'll get kind of an overall view. So don't get overly too concerned with the lower numbers on the AVI. Basically, we need to do a better job of continuing to go out and market the AVI to the public, making sure they understand what the benefits are in terms of convenience, and more importantly, lower total cost per mile, 10 cents versus 20 cents on the pay-by-mail. And as we do that, we'll start to see these numbers increase.
And Chairman, also, we're continuing to work with the NTTA on ways to further distribute and make it easier for folks to get tags in this region as well. An example is an interface that would allow multiple retail vendors to distribute tags and to take payments on replenishing tags through a third party called Incom. We're currently working with NTTA to try to expand that. That would, we believe, make it much easier for your patrons.
Currently, there's only one location for the actual tags. That's the city's one-stop shop, and that's where the physical tags are obtained today. So anything we can do to kind of spread out geographically the areas to pick up the tags would be helpful as far as getting those tags into the hands of the community. Is that correct, Mr. Tejas?
That is correct. So the one-stop shop at 811 Texas is up and operating. You can go in with a credit card, debit card, cash, check, and pay for those tags. I would mention also we've been discussing this with the county as well to see what county facilities throughout the entire county that we could utilize the same sort of thing, so that we could actually the users can actually go out and pay for tags, replenish their accounts in county facilities as well. So we're looking at all options.
On the pay-by-mail transaction, as the chairman stole my thunder just a bit before, we are seeing a much increased over what was projected, and that is just the impact of them choosing to pay with the pay-by-mail process.
Now, one of the things, just for clarification, that's there is that's not necessarily collected. That's billed. There's a term called leakage in the industry, which has a certain percentage of what's billed versus collected. So what the board is seeing today is just what's billed. Is that not correct, Mr. Tejas?
No, sir. Actually, so what Clayton is going through right now are just the transactions. So the actual transactions. Once we get to revenues, though, we have backed out, and Clayton will go into detail there, the actual numbers that we're presenting. So,
thank you for the clarification.
yes, sir.
So this is just a graphical to kind of show that we had targeted around 30% for this first quarter, and we're running closer to 20 to 22%. Again, it's not unusual to see it back up a little bit, because what you're seeing is some of your infrequent users are getting tags, some of your new tags, and what we really need to do is get some of those folks that are more frequent users converted from the pay-by-mail system to the toll tag or to the transponder. Now on revenue, this is the probably the biggest challenge to explain. Forecasted revenue is what the rating or the traffic and revenue firm has identified what you should collect and place in the bank. That takes into account leakage. It takes into account any misreads in the lane, any challenges in collection. All of those is associated with that. For our purposes today, expected revenue, we tried to normalize it as much as we could, which was we took what's earned at the lane, earned revenue, which is every transaction, the value of that transaction. We backed out then your leakage, anticipated leakage, based on the statewide collection rates that they're seeing for pay-by-mail processes. And then we also backed out your operating costs because of the agreements that you currently have with Central Texas RMA for your pay-by-mail process, and through the interoperability hub with the NTTA, you pay a percentage of your total transaction value to them. So we've netted that all out, and now your comparison from what we anticipate, your expected revenue that we will deposit in the bank, this is compared then to the forecasted revenue. And as you can see, through the first quarter, again, we were slow out of the gate, but we've made up, and by the end of the third quarter, we're hitting right at projections. Now, I will tell you that means that you're performing a little better than the TNR folks anticipated, because their number did not include netting off your operating costs for processing those transactions. So now there will be a third column.
Mr. Howell, hold on.
Yes, sir.
Wanted to get an opportunity before we go forward to see if our marketers or if anybody has thought about getting some sort of inducement for the pay by mail when we send them back whatever it is that we send. Is it possible that we can say this is how much you paid, and had you had the toll tag, you would have paid so much?
Yes.
I mean, that would be a striking difference if I'm told I paid $20 by mail, and you know I could have only paid $10.
Actually, on the invoice that we mail out, there is a section on it that explains the savings that you could have realized had you chosen to use a transponder
Thank you.
account. And also, we give the collection agencies, you've given the collection agencies the opportunity then to discount and forgive some of the fees if they'll go ahead and convert and open an account at that time. The number one question we've received so far from the one-stop shop so far, and I think it's very telling, is, do I really need to pay this? And what happens if I don't? Well, I think that when you come into a new community, that's the challenge that you have, is in motivating people to make the choice to pay, and to pay it early. And I think that's what we're seeing in some of our numbers is we're in that educational process where the traveling public is learning to use the managed lanes effectively. Our AVI revenue, again, because the transaction volumes are down, the AVI revenue is down. And again, our pay by mail, then you'll see conversely that it's above what was anticipated. What we'll see going forward, in addition to these two columns, would be a third column that will compare back to once we've had our collection cycle. Understanding that when you use the road by pay by mail, you'll drive through, you'll get an invoice within 30 days of that transaction. You'll be given 30 days to pay. If you don't pay within that 30 days, you'll be sent a first notice of non-payment. You'll be given 30 days to pay that. And then if you don't pay that, you'll be given, again, 30 more days, and then 30 more days, and then it goes to the court process. So this is a long collection cycle. So it's a long time period to manage your accounts receivable. And so we won't see good collected revenue numbers probably until the third quarter of this year. We'll see what we've really collected in the first quarter of the year, and then we'll be able to go through each quarter and add a third line on these graphs to tell you your performance.
We'll also be able to, at that point, take a look at, Mr. Howell is determining or using a leakage number that's kind of indicative for the entire state. There's a little concern early on with being on the border, and we'll see if that holds true, if we have a higher leakage because of Mexico plates, or is it the same, is it less? We put a number of items in place to try to address that, such as license plate readers and some other items. So, but we won't be able to tell that for another 3 to 6 months. Is that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think that's fair.
Any questions for Mr. Howell in regards to the overall first 3 months of the managed lanes?
As part of it, so this is obviously the first performance report. If there's any additional information that you'd be interested in seeing in the next report, please let me know. And you can, after this meeting, I will post online where the agenda is, this report with the cover sheet that I've provided to each of you, so you can take some time and really dig into it and figure out if we're missing anything. If you want to see something presented differently, please just let me know, and we'll do that for the next quarter report.
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
I think that many of the citizens of El Paso would like to know, and I'm going to try and phrase this. We have a number of international license plates on our roadways locally. If they use it, do we have a methodology to bill them, or is that just leakage?
There are some tactics to pursue that. That's certainly not the strongest area in our portfolio, our collection portfolio, but that's certainly something that we are continuing to work with. We're working with some of the other RMAs also that have some of the same challenges as you are experiencing. We'll get a better feel for how big this challenge is, but it's our intention to collect the toll from everyone that uses the road.
And if I could touch on that as well, we're actually pursuing 2 separate avenues in addition to the processes that, for example, the Cameron County RMA, who's also located on the border. They have a toll facility, and then Camino Colombia in Laredo. So we're watching to see what they're doing with Mexican plates. But outside of that, there was a new legislation passed this last legislative session that allows for the creation of what's termed a habitual toll violator. And that new legislation, which includes foreign plates, which is not only Mexico, but New Mexico, Oklahoma, and non-Texas plates, it provides for that habitual toll violator status, which opens up a whole new list of enforcement availabilities that are open to us. I'll mention that TxDOT is using the habitual toll violator status, so we're watching them to see how that is used and how it works. Outside of that, we've also been working with the City of El Paso through their International Bridge Division, as well as their police department, for potentially purchasing what are referred to as automated license plate readers. So we would place those on the City of El Paso's international bridges so that we would know immediately. And that's effectively what we would do is we would upload our list of Mexican plate violators into the database that would then serve the automated license plate readers, so that police at any time could provide the enforcement necessary at the bridges once a habitual tow violator was located at the bridge. So we're looking at different alternatives that are new, that are not being used elsewhere. But we're, like I say, we're partnering with police department and the bridge division as well just to evaluate those options.
Mr. Chair, may I ask one more question? You alluded to New Mexico license plates. So we do not have a mechanism to build a New Mexico license plate?
No, we absolutely do.
Okay.
Have a mechanism.
Right, we do. The only reason I mentioned that is that I wanted to be clear that the habitual toll violator status is not just for Mexican plates. It's all what are termed foreign plates, so any non-Texas resident plates.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yes, sir. Mr. Tejas, you mentioned potential purchase of the license plate readers. I thought in previous board meetings we had discussed, and the license plate readers were approved and would be provided both to the PD and to the International Bridge Department.
The board has not approved the actual purchase yet. In fact, we're working with the police department right now to identify what they're looking for, make sure it's within our budget, and then I will actually come back to the board with a change order to Telvent's contract, as Telvent would actually be purchasing and installing the equipment.
When do we anticipate that would go forward?
I think they're moving very quickly now, so I would hope May.
Last item, I've asked Mr. Tejas for kind of a quarterly update on these statistics. I'm not certain that looking at these on a month-by-month, especially this early on, does much. So unless the board feels otherwise, I'm going to ask that Mr. Tejas and Mr. Howell update us quarterly on these numbers so we get a better idea and have a little more data to be able to look at and determine what we're doing. Thank you, Mr. Howell.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Tejas, also, can you bring us up to speed real quickly on kind of what we mentioned, Lopez Marketing? Are they continuing to get the word out about the AVI transponders and what their efforts are?
They are, and in fact, what I'd like to do at the next board meeting, in fact, in between now and the next board meeting, I will provide each of you with a memo updating what Lopez Marketing has done to date and what our plan is going forward. But they are continuing with their marketing efforts to make sure that the toll tag information is provided to the public. I would mention too, as Mr. Howe noted earlier, one of the best advertisers for the toll tag is that initial bill. So I'm confident that we will see a number of those pay-by-mail users flip over to the toll tag before too long.
Where are we on the budget for advertising? Have we utilized that full?
We have. So we have two separate marketing budgets. One was to get us through the startup when that was exhausted, and we utilized that. And if you recall, at one of our prior board meetings, we discussed that and talked about what that budget
like
was.
$68,000.
That sounds correct. And then we've built in on an annual going forward basis $50,000 for marketing, if I remember correctly. And I'll confirm that and send that to you with the memo. But I believe it was $50,000 for marketing on an annual basis for going forward.
Okay, thank you.
We're also very fortunate, as everyone knows, to get a lot of press across the board. Mr. Tejas was on TV a great deal, so we got a lot of free press. So we really did a fairly good push to get the word out, whether it be on the late night news programs or morning programs. I just think we need to continue, based on the AVI numbers, doing what we need to do to push those AVI numbers up, and we can discuss that the next board meeting with Lopez and kind of their efforts along those lines.
Certainly, and we'll look at making the marketing focus not so much the use of the facility and letting people know about the facility, which was obviously the focus of the initial outreach plan. This outreach plan ought to be focused more on flipping people over to the toll tag use. So we'll look at that.
Any other questions before we move back to item number 8? If not, item 8, discussion and action on the following items as they relate to the 2013 El Paso County Comprehensive Mobility Plan 2013 County CMP. A presentation, update, and general overview on the 2013 County CMP and the CRRMA's role in such plan. And B, a board resolution authorizing a transportation project and pledge agreement, which I understand is one agreement, with the El Paso County, and authorizing the other matters related to the use of the vehicle registration fee revenues for proposed bond issuance. Mr. Tejas, Mr. Braden's not here, so you're up.
He's here.
We're here. He's here.
Good.
We're all
Thank
here.
you.
If I could ask you to also read items 8C and D on the back page into
Thank
the
you.
record so we could discuss them all at once.
8C, a board resolution selecting an underwriter syndicate and a trustee for the proposed vehicle registration fee bond issuance. And D, remaining steps necessary for the proposed CRRMA debt obligations related to the 2013 county CMP.
All right, thank you. So again, Raymond Tejas, Executive Director of the Camino Regional Mobility Authority. What I thought I'd do is present, we've got a PowerPoint for item 8A, which will give a very general description of the 2013 El Paso Comprehensive Mobility Plan in terms, specific terms of how the Camino Real RMA is involved. So let's go through that very briefly. And I've met with the new board members, and we've discussed this very generally, but I did want to touch on this because obviously some of the later items are directly related to the Comprehensive Mobility Plan. So I want the full board to have a better feel for what we're after here. So conceptually, what we've done is through the Comprehensive Mobility Plan, the 2013 Comprehensive Mobility Plan is really the County of El Paso, TxDOT, the RMA, the MPO, City of El Paso, the Town of Horizon City, and the City of Socorro have all come together to prioritize a list of about 16 projects that are important transportation projects for the region. Collectively, these projects amount to over $400 million worth of transportation improvements for the region. The RMA specifically, and as you see here highlighted in purple and gold, are the projects that the Regional Mobility Authority will be directly involved in. Specifically, the gold highlighted projects are those that mainly the RMA's role is to provide financing for, with the exception of number 15, Arterial 1, which we will discuss. And those projects in purple, not only will the RMA be tasked with financing the projects, but also developing those projects, meaning that we would go out and hire the design firms and the contractors and really see those projects to the end and turning them over to the appropriate jurisdiction at that point. So of the 16 projects, you see that we're involved in a great number of those projects. So let's talk about how we are involved. So this actually, before we do that, this talks about the total project contribution. So when you look at the Comprehensive Mobility Plan itself, you see El Paso County providing approximately $132 million, and we're going to talk about how they're doing that, because both of the debt issuances that will arise from county revenues will involve the RMA. The Town of Horizon City is providing $5 million. The City of Socorro is providing $9 million. TxDOT, the MPO, and other sources bring up $260 million to what I mentioned before, which is in excess of $400 million for this Comprehensive Mobility Plan. So, as I mentioned, there are two ways that the RMA is involved in the Comprehensive Mobility Plan. The first is through what are referred to as vehicle registration fees. Back in August of last year, El Paso County adopted a new vehicle registration fee, so in essence, which took effect January 1. So when you go in to register your vehicle, there's an additional $10 charge starting on January 1. That additional $10 goes into a separate bucket that is allocated directly to the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority. And effectively what we are doing now with that additional revenue is pledging that revenue, and that's what you're going to see under item 8B, which Mr. Braden is here to discuss in detail. We are pledging that revenue stream from the county to go out and issue bonds. Those bonds will generate approximately $70 million in bond proceeds, and that $70 million will then be used to pursue the projects that I've identified in gold. So number 2, number 13, number 15, and number 16. And again, we'll go through these projects in a little more detail as we go forward. So that's the first project, and here they are, in fact. That's the first bucket that we will be tapping into. So again, with vehicle registration fees, we will issue bonds and use those bond proceeds to pay for the development of these projects. I should, in a little detail here, projects 2, 13, and 6, excluding Arterial 1, those projects, in effect, the RMA will simply provide those funds to TxDOT, so TxDOT will be responsible for developing those projects. Number 15, Arterial number 1, we will actually use those proceeds to develop the project. The other type of financing that we'll be involved in through the Comprehensive Mobility Plan includes transportation reinvestment zones. So a couple of years ago, the RMA assisted the El Paso County, the Town of Horizon City, and the City of Socorro in the creation of their very first transportation reinvestment zones. The reason that we did that, in fact, the plan at that time was that we would help them create their transportation reinvestment zones. The incremental revenues of their respective transportation reinvestment zones would then be assigned to the Regional Mobility Authority. We would go out and issue debt, and the debt proceeds would then be used by the RMA to develop a slate of projects. That concept has moved from being a standalone slate of projects and was absorbed really into the comprehensive mobility plan. So what you see here is really something that we had been working on for several years. So the county, Horizon City, and Socorro have all adopted their first transportation reinvestment zones, and we are working with each of them now on the assignment agreement so that those revenues will be assigned to us, and then again we will go out and issue debt, likely state infrastructure bank loans. And this model that I'm outlining to you is exactly what we did with the City of El Paso for their transportation reinvestment zones number 2 and number 3, for which we've issued, we've actually borrowed, taken out 3 state infrastructure bank loans in the amounts of $30 million, $20 million, and $6 million. So this model works, and we're using it, that model for the comprehensive mobility plan as well.
Mr. Tejas, I think it's important to note in regards to the RMA, with the issuance of the $72 million approximately in bonds for the VRF, as well as the issuance of $70+ million for the in SIB loans that we're going to be based on the TRZs, there is no risk to the RMA. The county backstops the VRF funds as well as their portion of the TRZ, as well as Horizon and Socorro. Is that correct?
That's correct. There is no risk to the RMA. That's correct. Well, and we have no revenue stream, so that works out well.
So just to be clear, we're out there passing those, but they're, in addition to the VRF and the TRZ, they're backed as well by the municipalities that stand behind those particular financing instruments.
That's correct. So these are the transportation reinvestment zone projects, and we've got somebody here from our general engineering consultant team that will actually get into these projects in detail. And the reason why we're breaking this PowerPoint into 2 is that I want to touch very briefly on the projects that we are providing financing for, and then I'm going to turn it over to our engineers to provide some technical details on the projects that we are actually the developers for which we are actually issuing debt and actually pursuing the projects. So this is the first of the projects that we will transfer funds over to TxDOT for. This is referred to as I-10 border highway connectors. Really what this is, they also refer to it as east to east, west to west connection. So really what you're looking at with the yellow arrows here is the spaghetti bowl. And when you're heading to the spaghetti bowl from the west side, there's no easy connection from I-10 to get down to Loop 375. So this project does that. That makes that eastbound I-10 movement connect easily to eastbound Loop 375, and the same for westbound I-10 connecting down to westbound Loop 375. That's obviously very important for connectivity issues, as highlighted by the recent issues that we had when the electric pole went down and shut down I-10. There was no easy way to connect from I-10 down to Loop 375 to bypass that problem area. So this is an important project that TxDOT is pursuing, and the RMA will provide approximately $4.92 million in vehicle registration fee revenues. Now, I should mention when we're talking about the amounts, all of these amounts are subject to change. That's a current estimate. TxDOT, in this particular project, TxDOT is developing the design work, so those estimates will fluctuate a little bit, we anticipate, and the vehicle registration fee amounts could fluctuate as well. And of course, I'll keep you posted on that as we go forward. The letting year for this one is anticipated for 2016. FM 1110 is an extension, an upgrade rather, of the roadway that goes into Clint. And this one, you'll note, this is a $35 million project. We anticipate providing the full $35 million to TxDOT for their completion of this roadway as it's on their system, and that would obviously come from vehicle registration fee. TxDOT is anticipating a letting year of 2015 for this one. Manuel F. Aguilera Highway, this is the connection from I-10 down to State Highway 20. At State Highway 20, there is an existing roadway of Manuel F. Aguilera, so this is a connection. If you follow the existing roadway of Manny, it's also referred to as MF Aguilera. If you follow that from State Highway 20, it goes all the way down to the Tornillo Port of Entry, the new port of entry that the county has created. So this is a very important piece for the county's port of entry. This one we anticipate providing $17.2 million in vehicle registration fee to TxDOT. Again, this is a TxDOT roadway on their system, so we're providing the funding. We anticipate letting TxDOT anticipates letting this one in 2015 as well. And this one, I'm going to ask for Rafael Cruz from Atkins, who is also part of our general engineering consultant team, to come up, and this will be our pass-off point. Arterial 1 is being funded by vehicle registration fees as well. However, the RMA will retain the development of this particular project. So I want Mr. Cruz to come in and talk a little bit about the details of this project, and then go into, after this project, we will begin discussing the Transportation Reinvestment Zone projects, for which the RMA, as I mentioned, is also issuing debt but also developing. So Mr. Cruz will provide those details for you.
Thank you, Mr. Telles. For the record, Rafael Cruz with Atkins. Good morning. The Arterial 1 project, it's as specified in the MPO plan as a 4-lane arterial road connecting from the Americas State Subdivision to Pelicano. Existing portions of that roadway are being built by a developer. That is the section on the Mission Ridge. We prepared a preliminary estimate, total project cost estimate, and that fluctuates between $7 million and $9 million. What's the difference is that the $7 million will accommodate a pavement structure that is asphalt. The $9 million will accommodate a pavement structure that will be concrete. So that's the main difference. What the total project cost includes all the development cost of the job plus the construction cost on the project. Those include environmental clearance, development of a schematic design, preparation of construction documents, bidding the project, following through construction inspection, and closure of the project. The estimated letting date at this time, it's late 2015. We are working closely with TxDOT to expedite the environmental process. We're trying to make these projects become categorical exclusion projects, which is a shorter time frame in order to get environmental clearance. We cannot let the actual project until we get that environmental clearance. The project will include shared use path, curb and gutter, and enclosed drainage systems. This is the same picture, but the blue sections that you see, it's areas where current or approved development within the county limits are proposed. The green dots and the purple dots are existing or proposed water retention facilities. Retention, it's a main issue. It could trigger some environmental concerns. We're trying to identify them early and use them as much as possible so that environmental process gets shortened as much as possible. The next project is the old Waco tanks.
Mr. Chair, can we go back for a second?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Can you go back to the previous slide? The one before that? That
Yes,
one.
sir.
No, the one with the cost.
Yes, sir.
I just have who makes the determination if it's going to be asphalt or concrete? And the reason, let me preface my question. We're so far behind on what we need to do infrastructure-wise. We know what's going to happen if we do asphalt because of the tremendous growth on the east side. So who is the decision-making body to make that a concrete?
So ultimately, who decides is the ultimate owner of the facility. In this case, it's the County of El Paso. So they will actually make that decision for us.
Okay, so we as a body can make a recommendation, or is that strictly their
We will make a
decision?
recommendation through our general engineering consultant, and certainly if the board would like input, you can certainly share that with him. But ultimately, the county will decide.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, we recognize your question. You know, with the growth, having an asphalt section, we're going to need to come back in several years down the road and rehabilitate that, which are additional costs. All of that is considered when we're doing the analysis of what pavement structure will have better long-term reliability.
The asphalt is going to end up costing more than $9 million. Okay.
Well,
Thank you.
and I would mention that we early on the Regional Mobility Authority Board actually tasked our general engineering consultant with developing cost estimates, and those cost estimates, most if not all of them, include the option with recommendations that we're going with pavement. Now, but again, ultimately, the county will make that decision. But I think also I should mention I've been in discussions with Ernie Carrizal, the Public Works Director of the county, and I think I know he recognizes the number of vehicles that are projected to come out here, and he recognizes that. In fact, this came up on one of the other projects, and he was adamant that they go with pavement on that particular one because of the projected numbers. So I think the sentiment that you're mentioning is shared by the county.
Thank you very much.
If I can add to it, it's a facility that is very well needed. It parallels Loop 375, so we know it's going to be used. But my question is more to the cross-section. In particular, it's a tiny cross-section that we see in here, but are we adding any facilities for landscaping, any facilities for bike facilities, walks? Can you go a little bit into that detail for cross-section?
Yes, sir. For all the projects in the comprehensive mobility plan, we have allocated on our cost estimates funding for landscaping. All the facilities will require either separate bike lanes and sidewalks, or what we call a shared use path, which is a combination sidewalk bicycle facility. In the interest of time and getting these projects get to construction as soon as possible, we're trying to limit the amount of right-of-way that is acquired. Right-of-way acquisition takes a lot of time. We're working with TxDOT and the county, the city of Socorro, the city of Horizon City, to minimize the right-of-way takings and expedite that process. When you get into a situation that you're acquiring right-of-way, the environmental document level raises. So we're trying to keep it at categorical exclusion if we can.
But at the same time, property is going to be bought regardless. Am I wrong or am I right?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, we're trying to minimize the impacts on the right-of-way, which means trying to not acquire right-of-way or buying properties if we can do that to accommodate the roadway cross-section.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but it's my assumption, is property being bought for this cross-section?
There is certain right-of-way on all of these projects where that's going to have to be acquired.
And so if we have to do that, the consideration, I would recommend that we go in and look at what is needed. Again, not going back and not doing enough initially. If we're going to be buying right-of-way, it may be worth that consideration. The other thing is that I wondered if on facilities like this, is it appropriate, is that technology enough that we can use solar lighting for a safety lighting as opposed to electrical? Those are the topics that I've been asking to be considered.
You know, you bring a very good point, and you know, sustainability has become a very critical issue in the country. We will do elements that help promote sustainability. Alternative methods of lighting is one of those. In Austin, we're using some of that. In other locations throughout the state is moving towards those type of sustainability requirements. Drainage is also another one of those that sustainability plays a very, very, very critical role. So in these projects, we'll accommodate some of those sustainability elements.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. We'll talk about the second project, the Old Waco Tanks project. This project, it's a joint effort between El Paso County, the city of Socorro, and as Raymond, Mr. Telles mentioned, the CRRMA and TxDOT. It's a new 4-lane facility going from North Loop or FM 76 to I-10 eastbound frontage roads. The total project cost, again, will have the asphalt range and the concrete range. $10 million to $12 million. Our partners on this project, TxDOT, have stepped up to the plate and help us develop the project, as we don't have readily available funding to develop the design on the project. This project is environmentally cleared. The schematic has been completed and approved, and the district office in TxDOT is developing the plans, final construction drawings. They have committed to deliver that to the RMA in the month of August of this year, and we're anticipating letting that project in the fall of 2014.
As the board knows, we only have limited funds. We're really not on the projects that we are developing. We will be doing the schematic, the environmental, the final design, the bidding process, supervising construction, all the way till that project is finished and turning that project over to the county. Because we were not really capable until we have this vehicle registration fee development agreement put in place with the county, have those funds available to begin, we asked TxDOT, and TxDOT assisted us with putting this project forth and assisting, as was mentioned here. So that's what we're doing. So this project will be further along than it would have been had we have waited until the funds are available from the county.
Correct. Let me point out something very important, and it's the City of Socorro has agreed to acquire the right-of-way necessary for this project to happen. In the meantime, TxDOT continue developing the plans. In the event that all that right-of-way is not acquired, our intentions are to have the project let, and contractors know that the project is going to have a late start in construction, so it don't cost any additional funds. Contractors are aware that that is the bidding process, how it's going to go. Again, the project include bike lanes, sidewalks, and a new traffic signal at the new intersection with North Loop. The next project is the Rojas widening. It goes, makes Rojas a 6-lane facility from the city limits of El Paso heading towards East Lake. Again, the preliminary cost, total cost, it's $5 million to $7 million, with the asphalt being the lower and the concrete being the higher. The letting date is scheduled for 2014. Again, this is one of those projects that TxDOT is partnering with us because the funding. They're developing the schematic. We'll receive a full schematic on this project in the month of May. At that time, we'll start the environmental investigations, prepare the environmental document, and develop the plans, specifications, and estimates, and let the project. Our target date for letting, it's 2014. The project will include also bike lanes, sidewalks, and some utility service extensions. Next project, it's East Lake Phase 1. This project, it's converting it to 6-lane facility divided from I-10 westbound frontage road to Darrington. Preliminary cost estimate, it's 24 to 33. TxDOT again has agreed to develop the preliminary schematic, and they will hand that off to the RMA in the month of June. At that time, we will continue with the development of the project. Methodologies that we're thinking to expedite the delivery of the project are to run the development of the environmental, finalizing the schematic, and starting developing the PS&E or plan specification and estimate concurrently in order to meet an aggressive letting date of mid 2015. We'll have a weekly recurring meeting with TxDOT in which we're involved making sure that the issues are addressed and the project is moving forward. And again, this is the blue indicates the areas where development is being approved or will be coming. So as you can see, the area is growing very, very rapidly.
If I could interject just very briefly, this is a good example of how and why transportation reinvestment zones are so useful in this area. This project is being funded by the Transportation Reinvestment Zone, and as you notice, the corridor that we are building on is getting ready to explode here. So that will be all significant incremental revenue to use to pay down the debt that we take out to develop this roadway. So this is a really good example of how and why TRZs work so well.
Yeah, let me point out that on this project, the widening is intended to occur to the inside, so we're not affecting any properties that are currently at the right-of-way line. It will also include a full reconstruction of the existing pavement structure. Okay, East Lake Phase 2. This is the continuation of the East Lake project. We broke this project, it's broken in two East Lake projects because the logical terminus and the characteristics of the two projects are fairly different. The first one that I just talked to you about is more of a widening to the inside project and reconstructing the existing pavement structure. And the East Lake 2 has some of those elements, but also have what we call a new alignment route at the end of the project heading towards Horizon Boulevard. This project will widen and extend it East Lake from Darrington to Horizon. Preliminary cost estimate is $21 million to $28 million, and this project is not being developed. We're on the waiting stages to get the funding so we can move the project forward. We'll include environmental investigations and environmental document. Most likely this one will be an environmental assessment, so it will take a little longer. That's pretty much what we have on this project. The city of Horizon City has agreed that they will acquire or obtain the right-of-way on this project. And on this map, you'll see the different colors are the different owners of land on the area. Some of them have plans for development of subdivisions and other commercial and other elements. So it's important for us to know that the acquisition process needs to be addressed rapidly. The next project is Greg Edgemere, is to construct a 4-lane divided arterial from El Paso city limits to Vista del Este. Preliminary cost estimate for the total project cost is $7 to $9 million. The letting date, tentatively, it's 2015. There is some gas line crossings and the extension of utilities alongside the proposed roadway. We're looking at a categorical exclusion without right-of-way takings. That's pretty much the project in a nutshell. Any questions?
For the new board members, you'll see these projects several more times. If you have specifics, questions on any particular project, Mr. Tejas will be glad to provide that for you. In addition, there's a fairly easy one-page sheet of the funding sources for the $405 million. As Mr. Tejas has mentioned, that has shifted several times. If you'd like to see it, he can give you as it sits in its current condition, but it may also change as monies are moved. The totals stay the same, and they go forward. At the end of the day, these projects will be let, hopefully with how they're designed and put out, the letting will come in better than anticipated, and they can go for the upgraded options. If not, I'm sure some of these bid packages will go as an option, so the county has a decision, as well as Horizon and Socorro, to determine what they want to do and how best to utilize their dollars at the end of the day. So thank you.
Thank you.
So the intention then really was for item 8A to give the board a better understanding of the comprehensive mobility plan and certainly the two areas that we would be involved in financing projects and certainly those other projects that we will be developing. At this point then, this really takes us to item 8B, for which thankfully Mr. Braden is here now for. This one specifically deals with effectively the assignment of the vehicle registration fee revenues to the Regional Mobility Authority so that we can go out and issue debt. So I'm going to ask Mr. Braden to approach the podium so he can outline this agreement. This agreement has been negotiated with the county for quite some time, but it went before the Commissioner's Court this past Monday and was approved in the form that you have received it. So with that, I'd ask Mr. Braden to brief the board on the agreement.
Thank you. Paul Braden with Norton Rose Fulbright, Bond Counsel to the RMA. As Raymond outlined, this really is the key fundamental agreement with respect to allow the RMA to issue bonds for these projects from this source. And it's the four primary projects initially, which are the ones that were outlined in gold in Raymond's presentation. So what this agreement does is, and to give a little background to the new board members and to the members of the public, so last year the county and the RMA went into discussions, entered into an interlocal agreement, and the county committed and levied the $10 special vehicle registration fee per vehicle registered in El Paso County. And that fee is the source of revenues that are going to pay back these bonds. So the county is currently now levying an additional $10 fee per vehicle. That fee can only be turned over to an RMA located within the county's jurisdiction, which currently that is us. And so that fee is being collected and it's going to be turned over to the RMA. And so what this agreement does is really tell the RMA, what it can do with that fee, and specifies how that fee comes through and what is the waterfall of how that fee is paid. So it has been negotiated at quite length with the county. The Commissioner's Court approved it on Monday. And the process will be that once this agreement's approved, that's really the fundamental building block to allow the bonds to be issued. And we will bring back to this board the bond documents. And so the structure of how this will work with respect to this debt issuance would be they would be special vehicle registration fee revenue bonds. So the source of the bonds will only be these revenues. These revenues come from the county pursuant to the contract that would be approved today. Once they are turned over to the RMA, they go into sort of a top of a waterfall. And the bond documents and this agreement that you're approving today sort of explain how that waterfall works. But basically, the money goes in the top and it pays certain necessary expenses of issuing the bonds, like the trustee, any rebate, any money owed the federal government because they're taxed in bonds, and then the senior bondholders, which is the bonds you're going to be issued. The document does spell out in the trust indenture that would come before you, probably in a couple of weeks, spells out that after the senior bondholders are paid, it does provide for subordinate bondholders. It does provide that a small administrative fee is paid to the RMA as part of the construction cost for these projects. And there's a bottom bucket at the end that's called surplus revenues. After all the other buckets are paid for, there are surplus revenues, in essence, left over according to projections. And the county has flexibility to use that bottom bucket for other long-term transportation projects as authorized by the statute that allowed this levy of the special vehicle registration fee. And that may be putting some of that money towards the TRZ financing, which is a separate financing. It might be, requests to the RMA to do other long-term transportation projects. But really, that's the flow. And what this agreement is the contract between the entity that's levying it and collecting it and turning over to us, the entity that is issuing the bonds. Then after that, the other agreements to allow for the bond issuance are really agreements between the RMA and the bond trustee, the RMA and the underwriter who's selling the bonds. So those agreements are more RMA-centric, and this is really the county agreement that starts it all. I'm open for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Braden? In addition, we'll have to go back to the county on every specific project, and the county will have to authorize each specific project that will be utilized, that this funding will be utilized for, and that will happen at their county meetings. Is that correct, Mr. Tejas?
That is correct. So as the chairman is outlining, we anticipate additional project development agreements. So by way of example, when we talked about the gold projects for which we are only providing financing, we will likely bring that back in a single project development agreement that outlines the RMA's responsibilities with those particular projects. The county then approves the pursuit of those projects and effectively the transfer of those funds to TxDOT. So we will be back with project development agreements as well.
There are no questions. Is there a motion authorizing the transportation project and pledge agreement with El Paso County and authorizing other matters related to the use of the vehicle registration fee revenues for a proposed bond issuance?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? 8B is approved. 8C, For the record, I'll read it again. Board resolution selecting an underwriter syndicate and a trustee for the proposed vehicle registration fee bond issuance. Mr. Tejas?
So again, we have with us Troy Madras. I'll ask him to approach the podium to provide a very brief PowerPoint on the selection process that we utilized for the underwriter syndicate and the trustee, which will be used specifically for the vehicle registration fee bond issuance.
Good morning again. For the record, it's Troy Madras with First Southwest Company. Today we're going to be discussing item 8C regarding the selection of the underwriting syndicate and the trustee for the proposed vehicle registration fee bond issue. On slide 1, what we're going to do here is just give the board a background related to the vehicle registration fee bond issue and then related to bond issues in general, and then go into the selection. So on slide 1, the background for the VRF, as we call it background, is that in 2013 the state legislature passed HB 1198, which enabled the county to charge an additional $10 fee starting on January 1, 2014. This fee can only be used by the Camino Real RMA or another RMA that's been created in the future. This past Monday, the county approved the Transportation Pledge and Project Agreement, which the board has just approved right now, which allows those vehicle registration fees to be pledged for the forthcoming bonds.
The legislation actually allows up to $10.
Up to. That's correct, yes. For the bond issue that we're describing, based on our analysis, we believe that the RMA can issue approximately $71 million in bonds that would be secured by the vehicle registration fees collected by the county. These fees will be used to fund projects associated with the CMP that we just described, and we intend to price these bonds in early May 2014. To give board members who are not aware the way this bond issue will work, we're just going to briefly discuss the different participants in the bond issue. Sort of in the center, as you can see here, is the RMA, and the participants that get involved are, starting on the left, the rating agencies whose job is to rate the bonds so they're available for public market, the auditor who provides the financial reports that investors look at to understand the financial health and condition of the authority, general counsel whose job is to look at the underlying legal documents and if there's procurement involved, those types of documents, bond counsel whose job is to understand the ramifications of the bond issue and assemble the bond documents ourselves, whose job is to work with the authority as it goes through the bonding process. The trustee has basically manages the bond issue and deals with the payments and also represents the bondholders, and then the underwriters, who has the arm-length relationship between the investors and the issuer. Just to go in a little bit more detail in terms of the bond participants, the issuer, in this case the RMA, its job is to create and approve the financing terms in the documents. They're obviously responsible for repayment of the debt. They provide data on an ongoing basis for the official statement as well as continuing disclosure, and then obviously responsible for complying with the terms and covenants in the financing documents. The general counsel, which in this case is Locklord, they're not hired specifically for the bond issue, but they also will review legal documents on behalf of the issue. Bond counsel is a nationally recognized firm with experience in municipal debt financing. In this case, it's Norton Rose Fulbright. They work with the issuer and the financing team on behalf of bondholders. They prepare the legal documents, and they also render opinions concerning the validity of the bond issue in regards that if it was tax exempt, which is important, obviously, for this market. On slide 4, the financial advisor for Southwest, in this case, we serve as a fiduciary for the issuer. We work on a wide range of financial management issues. We help with the selection of the underwriter. We work through every single step of the financing process. We help obtain the ratings from rating agencies, and we work to coordinate and manage and provide advice on the fairness of the pricing for the bond issue. Rating agencies basically provide analysis and reports that are provided to bondholders describing a lettered rating for the bonds that are being issued. And then last, the auditor presents the issuer's financial condition, and this provides a background information that can give comfort to bondholders regarding the issuer. On slide 5, the two parties that we're going to be identifying for this bond issue, first, the underwriter, is an investment bank that enters into an arm-length agreement with the issuer to sell bond to investors. They are involved in helping to review and shape the legal documents. They direct investors for the pre-sale bond marketing efforts. We'll be putting out a preliminary official statement, and for a period of time, they'll be working with different investors to gauge interest and to answer questions. On the day of the pricing, they'll be setting the interest rate and offering the terms of the bonds and accept orders from investors. They themselves will select their own underwriters' counsel to represent their interests. The issuer of the RMA may form a syndicate, so they may form a group of different underwriters whose job is to provide the best pricing possible for the bond issue. Last, the trustee is retained by the issuer but actually represents the bondholder interests. They manage trustee-held funds, reserves, and construction funds. They receive the interest and principal payments from the issuer, and they distribute the interest and principal payments to bondholders. They serve as the bond registrar and transfer agent, and they hold liens and security interests and exercise remedies for bondholders in the event of a default. So to recap, the 9 members of the underwriting pool that we discussed were, on the national side, B of A, Citi, JP Morgan, regional banks, Raymond James, Southwest Securities, and Stifel, and finally minority women business-owned enterprises, CRRRMA, Estrada Hinojosa, and Ramirez and Company. So based on this underwriting pool, the selection committee also identified who they thought would be the number of underwriters to form the syndicate, and based on our review, their experience, the analysis that we did on slide 7, our proposed underwriting syndicate recommendation for the vehicle registration fee bond issue series 2014, senior manager, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, and co-managers Raymond James, Estrada Hinojosa, and Ramirez and Company. So in this proposed syndicate, we have one of our national members, one of our regional members, and 2 of our minority women-owned businesses in the syndicate. I'm not sure if we want to go through the entire presentation and then have them discuss, or should we stop here?
It's up to the chair, but I'd recommend that we take action on the underwriting syndicate first, and then we'll move into the trustee process.
And as you can see here, the potential conflict with Southwest Securities that we discussed, and it's only a potential conflict. They're not included here, so it really doesn't affect us at this point. So is there a motion to accept the underwriters as presented here with the senior manager and the co-managers? Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries.
Great, thank you very much. And we do have a representative here from B of A, so if board members have any questions after the meeting, I'm sure he'll be available to answer them. If we move to slide 8, on the trustee selection process, in February, the RMA issued a request for bids from qualified banks to serve as trustee for the upcoming bond issue. We had 6 banks respond to the request. In this sense, they essentially gave us their fee schedule, and the 6 banks are all very well-known banks in the state and the country, and from our perspective, we really see it as more of a sort of fee-based understanding. I think they all provide an equal level of service, and we ended up going with the bank that had the lowest cost for their fee schedule. On slide 9, our recommendation for the trustee is BNY Mellon NA. And again, we'll turn this back to the board for any discussion and to vote on the selection.
This was based purely on fee, is that correct?
On fees, yes.
Any questions in regards to the recommendation of the trustee? If not, is there a motion for the trustee for the vehicle registration fee bond issues series 2014 of BNY Mellon NA?
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries.
Great, thank you very much.
Mr. Madras, before you
Yes.
leave, can you just cover for us the advantages of going out to the bond market for this $72 million for the VRF versus going to the SIB in terms of pricing, in terms of what the advantages are?
Well, it's a good question. I think at this point, the process to go from this approval by the authority to the bond issue and pricing schedule would probably be one of timing. We can go to the bond market a lot faster. The state infrastructure bank loan of this size would require 2 readings plus an additional 90 days. So we've got at least 2 or 3 months of commission approval plus another 90-day period, and during that time working with TxDOT staff to hammer out all the details. So timing, I think, is an issue. We could price in early May and close by the end of May. So maybe 7 or 8 weeks from now, we'd have the money available. I think from an interest rate standpoint, the SIB might be a little bit less expensive, although we haven't done the comparison. The TxDOT staff use the standard tax-exempt borrowing rates per different rating categories. So if we're assuming this will be in the AA category, we would have we would get a rate that's related to what the market's requiring. The rate on a publicly sold issue may be slightly higher than that. So in that sense, the SIB fund might be better. Other advantages of the SIB versus the publicly sold bonds is very likely will require on the publicly sold bonds a debt service reserve fund, whereas a SIB typically won't. But there are ways that in the public market that we can reduce those fees. So there's really a toss-up between the two. I think from the start, the idea was, the state infrastructure bank's coffers aren't, unlimited, and so we wanted to save our powder for the Transportation Reinvestment Zone SIB loan. And sort
the
of
TRZs would be much more difficult to go out to the public market, so they're much easier and it's much more expedient through the SIB. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, especially when you're looking at that proposed rating.
So we could be potentially looking at a bond sale by early summer and having funds available to start beginning the development of these projects?
Wait, in regards to the TRIZ or in regards to the VRF?
I'm back to the VRF.
Oh, the VRF? Yeah, we could have funds by late May, early June. Yeah.
Just for the public's edification, what's the market interest rate wise today? What are we looking at?
I've got it in my other file. I'll be right back. In the current market, the true interest costs, or sort of the all-in borrowing costs for this deal, would be a 4.27%. So it's pretty advantageous. 30-year debt, level debt service. That's what it would look like.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for Mr. Madras? Thank you, Mr. Madras.
Yep, you got it.
So that then takes us to item 8D, which are the remaining steps necessary for the debt obligations related to the 2013 County Comprehensive Mobility Plan. So I'd mention a couple of things. As Mr. Braden noted, there will be bond documents that will be coming forward for your all's approval, and that depending on how quickly we can get those done. Obviously, we're trying to get bond issuance sooner rather than later. So I may ask the board for a special board meeting later in April if we can pull those documents together. And of course, I'll work with each of you individually to see if that can happen. Outside of that, the project development agreements, as they relate to the vehicle registration fees, will come to you much later, once the bond issuance is out and the project details begin to get a little firmed up, whether it's through TxDOT's development of the projects or the RMA's pursuit of them. Those project development agreements will come forward as well. Those are a little less urgent, of course. One other item that still has not been before the board are the essentially very similar to item 8B, an item that would transfer the Transportation Reinvestment Zone revenues from the county to the RMA, from the City of Socorro to the RMA, and from the Town of Horizon City to the RMA. Those assignment agreements are being worked on now. In fact, we are working with the County of El Paso on their assignment agreement first. Once we develop the formal, the finalized form from that agreement, we will share that with the City of Socorro and Town of Horizon City, and that's what we worked out with those two smaller municipalities, at which point then we will begin negotiating with those two other parties. So that remains to come back to you all as well. So other than that, I think that's all that I have for you on this particular agenda, of course, subject to your questions.
Any other questions from the board? Again, I'd like to welcome the new members. We're grateful for your commitment to serve and for your background and experience that you bring. If there's no other business, is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned at 10:35 a.m. on April 9th, 2014. Thank you.